Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about how one of the greatest discoveries that evolution ever made is that we are bags of mostly water. Now I use that phrase. That phrase comes from a Star Trek Next Generation episode probably 25 years ago. Let's just throw up that episode just for a minute and let's hear it. Let's see if we can get, there you go.
Online, sir.
Ugly, giant bag of mostly water.
Bags of mostly water? An accurate description of humans, sir. You are over 90% water surrounded by a flexible container.
Well, so there you go. Now, one of the things that they get wrong, or from our point of view, what I'd like to get across today is that more than just bags of mostly water, we're transparent, partially transparent bags of mostly water. And so unlike other mammals who are covered in fur, mostly they're all covered in fur, some of us primates evolved to lose much of our fur. And so what was now visible was what's going on underneath our skin, and our skin was is semi-transparent, through which we see the blood underneath the skin. And that's crucial. Now, before I even get into that, most of us have trouble even noticing. We see skin so often and it's so vanilla that we have trouble recognizing that you're seeing not so much the skin. So you're seeing the skin, but the entire look of skin is a consequence of some particular fixed nature of the skin, which varies, in different parts of your body, but otherwise is fixed and doesn't much change. And really, though, what you're seeing is dynamic changes underneath the skin, which is all the blood. That skin is a semi-transparent bag. Now, mostly we don't think of this. We just see the life in them, and we respond intuitively when we see blushes and blanches and things like this. But you see it much more clearly when you get a bruise. So if you have a bruise on your arm, suddenly you see all of the dark discoloration. Now, the dark discoloration is not because the skin has been messed up, not usually unless you have a cut, but very often you just have a nice punch. When someone punches you on the shoulder, you end up with all the blue, and over the next 5 or 6 days, in terms of the blood, in terms of how it degrades and it gets reabsorbed, it changes colors, gets eventually sort of yellow by the end, going through all of these different kinds of changes. What you're seeing is the blood under the skin, which is obvious on one hand, but not obvious in the everyday sense. We often just don't think of ourselves as transparent bags of mostly water, but in fact we are. Another way that we see this without thinking about it is, for medical personnel who are looking at veins, they're able to see veins at all. That's the fact because you're seeing the oxygenation variations under the skin. You can see where the deoxygenated parts are, and you can see the more red, ruddy parts, which are where the more oxygenated parts of the flesh are. That ability is because you're seeing right through the skin, right? Another way is that when you see sometimes we say the glow of youth, just beautiful skin, just looks beautiful and looks alive because you're basically seeing this glow of the oxygenated blood underneath it. And if you've ever seen a dead person or a very sick person who's just very sallow, if you see someone who's very iron deficiency, you'll just see a fundamentally different nature to their skin by virtue of the state of their body and their deoxygenation generally, their sort of systemic deoxygenation. The glow of youth, seeing bruises, seeing blushes, all of these things we're seeing all the time, and we're not usually consciously aware of these. You're implicitly aware of these because reading those things is so important for us in reading others. And so what's the big invention that I mentioned? I started off as one of the biggest evolutionary inventions for us humans. Evolutionary inventions was realizing that these transparent bags of mostly water can be read, can be seen by, if you can evolve the kinds of eyes that we primates evolved to see the changes of that blood underneath the transparent skin of those bags, then you can suddenly see emotions and state. And so this is one of my papers from 2006 when I was at Caltech. We were able to show that the kind of color vision that we primates have, which is an extra dimension above that of all the other mammals, is in fact not just any old general purpose kind of third dimension for color vision. It's a peculiar one, and it's, in fact, you can show that it's has exactly the needed peculiarity to sense the changes of oxygenation of the hemoglobin in the blood under the skin. Not because we evolved to care about hemoglobin or oxygenation per se, but it's so that we could, because on the basis of that, we can make judgments about what the emotions of the other people are. And they're often honest signals. That is, if you can show that you're oxygenated and show the redness, that you can't show redness unless you really are oxygenated. If I'm so winded, I'm about to collapse in a fight with you, let's say, well, I just can't show any more red because I'm so deoxygenated at that point, I can barely bring enough oxygen into my body. These are often not just signals, emotional signals like on your face, but more honest emotional signals that is important for us to read. So we primates evolved to have the peculiar kind of third dimension of color that mammals don't otherwise have, to see, to read these sorts of emotional states. And they're not just emotional states, there are other kinds of states, maybe of sexual receptivity. You see these gigantic big butts and chimpanzees that sort of signal depending on the time of the month, and also health. We on the medical domain, most clinicians, going back to the Greeks, it's the symptoms, the listed kinds of signs, the medical signs very often mention the pallor, the acute pallor of the skin, and this goes back to the Greeks. So, even though many medical people are trained on this, sometimes they may not have sat back and said, "Oh yeah, the reason that we can do that at all, the reason that the acute pallor of the skin is something that matters clinically, is because one, we're transparent bags of water. We need not have been, right? We might have been all furry, in which case we weren't transparent, or we might have had thick shells, or something like this." No, but we are semi-transparent bags of water. And two, we evolved exactly the kind of color vision to be able to sense the important variations in the nature of the blood underneath that skin of that semi-transparent bag. And so it's through this natural sense that all of us with red-green vision, with normal red-green vision, and then having both colors, because your yellow-blue also just lets you see where there's blood and where there's not, where there's greater and lesser concentrations of blood. The combination of your normal three-dimensional vision allows you to see two dimensions of states of the blood under the skin. And that gives clinicians extraordinary power to diagnose their patients, just to see it with their eyes. It gives all of us an extraordinary ability just to read the emotions and state and what's going on. Just something's wrong. Oh, hey, honey, what's wrong, right? You don't even know that their pallor was different because you just see it, you just feel it. You have an instinct to do this. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, they harness this naturally, often without having it explicitly even written down to them. They can see something's wrong, and they often say, "I'm not even sure how I knew," but they know. And it's been known for several hundred years, since Dalton, who was colorblind, and he was a great scientist. Colorblind doctors, red-green deficient doctors, are deeply handicapped at seeing exactly these kinds of things. So that's the transparent bags of mostly water. And what we did, I have this discovery from 2006 that I mentioned. Then what Tim Barber and I did back in around 2010 or so was that we then developed technology that helps both colorblind folks who are unable to see these oxygenation variations. Our technology augments those sorts of oxygenation modulations so that even color deficient folks have a chance to see these states going on in our mostly bags of water. This is important for regular folks, just to see the normal colors in life, but also to see and sense emotions and health and state on others, and especially important for medical personnel if they're colorblind. Well, now we've got tons of colorblind customers in the medical domain who are extremely happy because they've been handicapped, and they went into the field not really realizing that they'd be so handicapped, and they love our Vino optics technology for that purpose. And then just regular old, we've got a lot of other technology that whether you're colorblind or not, especially if you're not colorblind, it just augments your ability to see veins and health. But more generally, the point I want you to leave with, and as I'm going to get back into different high-level kinds of things, the kinds of things that a physicist type like me, I'm a cognitive scientist, a physicist, mathematician kind of type, these sorts of high-level things where you say, well, let's try to understand a cow, and a physicist walks in, so well, let's assume the cow is a sphere, that kind of thing. even though some of these things that a physicist or mathematician might do are very high level, like that were mostly that were transparent bags of mostly water, often you can end up with very insightful, interesting things that you can derive from these very high level, small numbers of assumptions. And I think I'm going to try to go through those because as an evolutionary theoretical biologist and cognitive scientist, there's lots of things in those domains that are quite exciting, whether you're in medicine or a regular person. And that was your science moment.